you're listening to the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Billy Z.
And I'm Steve Mowry.
Unfortunately, Brother Brian couldn't be with us tonight, but we're coming to you, and this is long delayed. Steve, I don't know how much we should say about an episode that never sort of happened but did.
You know, I think we have to have one of those once a year. Just unfortunately, it was our end of the year one.
And, of course, it's Star Wars. It's the second time that's happened to us.
I know.
For people who don't know, and there's no reason you should because we never told anyone, in December of 2016, we recorded an episode after we had all seen Rogue One because it's still, Force Awakens episode is probably my favorite episode of this cast. Love that episode. And nothing was recoverable. There was a technical glitch when we opened up the recording. And then we said, oh, well, we'll just do a Rogue One episode when the Blu-ray comes out. Yeah, that never happened. And with everything going on in December, it was really near impossible to get all of us together. I mean, Steve, you've had weddings, you've had a really busy month.
Oh, yeah.
And I, for a change, didn't. But I was sitting there waiting for the party to start. No one would come to my party, so it was a little sad. But we found time right after Christmas to record an episode where we covered The Last Jedi, and where we also covered some stuff that had within the last few weeks had happened, like the Crisis on Earth X crossover on the CW and the first few issues of Doomsday Clock. And when we went to edit the episode, only about 22 minutes of it was listenable, and the rest was corrupted, and it just went off into the ether to never be realized.
It's got to be the Star Wars curse. I really hope it doesn't
really
do that
think
for Han
it is.
Solo.
Yeah. But we are going to get a Star Wars episode out to you fairly soon because there's a lot of stuff about Last Jedi. And yeah, Last Jedi is not a comic book, but come on. It's not like we weren't going to see it. Come on. And, we have things we want to talk about it because, it's a franchise that matters to us. So at some point you're going to get a Star Wars episode. But we're just going to talk comics between the two of us. Not going to be that long of an episode because we have a few episodes coming up in the near future with I can't say who yet, but we do have some creators that are in line for episodes that I think you folks will be really excited to hear from, and in some cases hear from again. So we'll get to that very soon within the next few weeks of January and February. But right now we're going to talk about comic books, and possibly the most important comic book that has come out within the window since we last were with you was Doomsday Clock, which is the continuation / sequel / tribute / whatever you want to assign to it, where we do have to some degree, the integration of Watchmen characters into the DC universe. So, Steve, let's start with you, and let's just give a very basic overview about what we've seen in 1 and 2, and then we'll discuss it a bit.
Like Bill had just mentioned, we did talk a little bit about Doomsday Clock in the Lost episode of 2017, but just to recap kind of quickly on what we had discussed there, this Doomsday Clock series that's being put out by DC, it really does feel like a full continuation, not just so much in the storyline and bringing back some of the characters, but also in the style. I mean, one of the things that just immediately jumps out, the way that Gary Frank and Brad Anderson draw this and lay out these the panels, it just feels just like Dave Gibbons, back in the day for the original Watchmen series. It's beautiful. It's really a treat to kind of see that format carry over to this new one. And then, of course, we also get the wonderful little side stories, the back matter that happens at the end of each issue with, newspaper reprints or clips or file, little files and things like that. Menus for Morning Joe's. That's the diner that the Rorschach character eats here. And not the old Rorschach, because obviously, hate to spoil it for anybody who hasn't read the original Watchmen, but if you haven't, what's wrong with you? Is no longer with us, but there is a new Rorschach who we more or less are following in the first issue, and looking, through his eyes at his task that he's been given. But it does take place about 7 years after the end of the original book, where the world was supposed to be going into a new era of cooperation and peace. And unfortunately, people found out that the whole reason for this era of cooperation and peace was just a ruse instigated by Ozymandias. So unfortunately, things go right back to where they were, which was just a few minutes before midnight, to use the lingo in the book. And they're actually a lot worse. Except this time, there is no Dr. Manhattan to act as a failsafe to save everyone from themselves. So Ozymandias, working with the new Rorschach, who we don't know too much about, are trying to enact a plan to go and look for Dr. Manhattan, and that kind of kicks off the Doomsday Clock series. And it also works as the plot device to bring them into the regular DC universe. So obviously what Jeff Johns is doing with the series is trying to bring these characters in. These, I would say much beloved, but very well-known characters into the regular DC universe, bringing them in to hopefully, I don't know if they would, Bill, I don't know if you get the feel from this. This is definitely not going to be a one and done, but are we going to see these characters as, standard characters within the DC universe?
I really don't think so. I think there will be limited use of them because they are problematic characters.
Yeah.
And because it is a franchise, to use a word that probably shouldn't be used, but it is a franchise that has very specific connotations.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to see anything like Silk Spectre joining the friggin' Justice League. I mean, you're not going to see anything like that. But I do think if you did have multiversal stories that had an effect of crisis-type proportions, yeah, I think you would see them. This is setting them up as part of the DC universe. As part of the main DC Earth, no, I don't think you'll see that. I think these characters will continue to be used in a very limited and in a very targeted way. Just my feeling,
No, I kind of feel the same way because, like you said, they're kind of problematic, but they're also of a particular era. Not just a particular era in the book. The Watchmen that we know and love are all from 1985. It's a very timely piece, or maybe a work of its time. These characters are from a 1992 that exists in that universe and coming across. And I think we were talking about this right before the recording. What time period this actually is in DC Universe time, we're not really sure. Is this right around the time of actual Superman Doomsday, which would have been 92? Yeah.
Right. The first date of the story is November 22nd, 1992, which is the date that Superman 75 was released.
Yeah. But is that the same date in the DC universe? Because we're seeing it in the Watchmen universe on one side, and now we're coming across to the DC universe in issue number 2, where they make that transition into the universe that we're familiar with the Earth Prime potentially. But is the time the same? We'll find that out, I'm sure, over the next 12 issues. But it's very interesting. I think that after this is over, they'll probably go back to their own universe, but we don't know. I mean, there might be some artifacts, quote unquote, left behind.
Right.
The first potentials, I would say, for artifacts left behind could be, very likely, 2 of the new characters that are introduced in the first 2 issues of Doomsday Clock. Rorschach's task is actually to go and free them from prison, and these are the characters of the Mime and the Marionette, a husband and wife villain duo who share not just a passing resemblance to a well-known duo in the DC universe, Joker and Harley Quinn. But
also in continuing the tradition at this point of basing Watchmen characters on the Charlton characters that DC acquired in the early 80s. These are analogs for 2 not to exactly well-known adversaries of Blue Beetle known as Punch and Julie. And it's interesting that you can view them through that context, and you can also view them through the context of probably the premier villain couple in the DC universe as well.
And it's very likely that I'm guessing John's going to be using them more like the premier couple. The premier villain / semi-hero couple. Obviously,
Right.
Harley Quinn kind of goes back and forth there. The mime and the marionette in this case are very clearly villains, but they're very human villains. Automatically in the first issue, they kind of set up that they are sort of tragic lovers. The son that they had while they were in prison, Rorschach is able to kind of use him as leverage, or at least the promise of finding him as leverage to get them out, or to get him at least to follow him over to Ozymandias. And then in the second issue, you kind of have a little bit more background on how and why these two are actually being chosen as help to go find Dr. Manhattan. Mm-hmm. There's a very particular interaction that they had in the past when Dr. Manhattan was still around, that Ozymandias is hoping is going to sort of jumpstart Manhattan's memory and get him back to where he needs to be in the Watchmen universe. I'm really excited for this. The layout is just beautiful. Some of the fight scenes in the first issue between the mime and the other inmates are done perfectly with the layout, with the 9-panel layout, the very classic, I would say, 80s Dave Gibbons like art. It's not exactly the same. It's
not exactly the same, but it's also not exactly the same as Gary Frank's usual art either.
Yeah, exactly. You were telling me the last time about that.
Yeah, I think there's a greater sense of photorealism in it than I think you're used to seeing him. It's not radically different. It's clearly Gary Frank who's doing the art, but he is employing a couple of tricks that you don't usually see from him. Mm-hmm. And especially with how dark the story is. Because so far, almost everything we see is at night. Yeah. For him to be able to paint that story with such color within that restriction, I think it's the best work he's done. Honestly, I have no problem saying that.
It's great, and again, Watchmen as itself, as a 12-issue maxi series artifact from 1985 that. Of course, is one of the best and most well-known, well-recognized works of comic art. Obviously this can't replace it, but it does have a very an interesting feel to it in that it does really connect to it. It does have a great sense of picking up right where the original Alan Moore book left off.
Right, if not in sense of time, but in sense of tone.
Yes. Yeah. And not time, but tone. Just right. It could have been, the next chapter. Like if he had put an issue 13 out, this could be the 7 years later.
Yeah.
Which is something that Alan has done in the past.
But that's something where I have to say you really have to give a hat tip to Jeff Johns on this because he's not aping Alan Moore. Mm-hmm. He's taking some of the concepts and some of the gimmicks, for lack of a better word. It's interesting because it's not necessarily John's writing in Alan Moore's style. It's John's tailoring his writing to the story. Mm-hmm. Apart from some elements of Black Hand, I think this is about as dark as John's has gone. It's a very different dialogue structure than you're used to from John's. Would you agree with that? Mm-hmm.
Dialogue structure, but I think part of that it has to be in fitting with the format.
Yeah.
That they put themselves in. I think.
But I just think he knows what kind of story they need to tell here. And
very true. More of an homage than a copy.
Yeah, it's not. There's no way it's a copy. Just in terms of the story structure, I mean that's kind of shot out the window from the first issue. But there are hat tips. The most interesting one, I think, literally happens on the last page of Story and Art. It was something I did not see coming. And with the presence of another Watchmen character who, if you follow things in a linear sense, shouldn't be there. So that makes for some interesting predictions that I've heard from some people. I think it is also worth interesting with what you had talked about with what goes on in the first issue. The central element of the second issue is when this group of Mime Marionette, this new version of Rorschach and Ozymandias, go over to the DC, the new Earth, Earth 1, whatever the hell they're calling the main Earth on DC
Earth
right
Prime,
now.
Earth 1, Earth
Earth
0,
Prime,
Earth
yeah, whatever the hell they're
2.
calling it. They go over there. One of Ozymandias' tasks is to connect with the most intelligent person on that Earth, and the two candidates are Lex Luthor and Bruce Wayne, and he makes his choice. And you also have the book ending on an exchange between Batman and this version of Rorschach, which is gold. You know, as you said, with the background materials that they provide, you know, like you had in the original series with the Crimson Corsair and the Under the Hood segments, what they do here, which I think is really interesting, and this is something I did not catch until now, so maybe this is the present day. The bulletin news from LexNet is dated 12/7/2017.
Okay.
So they jumped into the future a little bit too for these Watchmen characters who were back there in 1992 until they made that jump. So,
Oh yeah, there it is. Yeah.
yeah, I did
December
not
2nd,
catch that the first time
1991.
around.
Well, and it's interesting too because the back matter in issue number 2 is all the DC Earth that we're used to. There might be some slight differences because of course there's this concentration of metahumans thing going on that is providing an interesting parallel to the so many minutes to midnight, world on the brink of war or on the brink of upset that is happening in the Watchmen universe at the same time. So it is kind of interesting. I also like how there are plenty of Big Belly Burger advertisements, as opposed to Gunga Diner in the Watchmen universe. But I don't know. I'm really intrigued about the next 10 issues. It is a 12-issue series altogether. And I'm really interested to see where it's going to end up.
And for any Watchmen purists out there, if your world consists of those 12 issues, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do think you are providing somewhat of a disservice to yourself by not sampling this. Just as I think they may have done that by not sampling particular before Watchmen series. I mainly mean Silk Spectre and Minutemen, which were just head and shoulders of the other material that came out during that initiative. To me, any appearance of Dr. Manhattan is majestic, and when you do see him in issue number 2 with the particular flashback, it's a very simple piece of information that's revealed. Pretty simple, but it's, I use this word again, majestic, in how that is spelled out to one of the characters and in the process spelled out to us as we read it. So a lot of good stuff, I think. Yeah, a lot of good stuff.
And just in case anybody's wondering, when Bill is mentioning it being majestic, Dr. Manhattan is wearing briefs in this appearance in issue number 2, so no, it's not that majestic.
You dirty mind. You dirty mind.
Hey, he's famous for being naked.
I do love his Charlie Brown briefs. I wonder where that inspiration came from. But so that's our encapsulation of Doomsday Clock number 1 and 2. Steve, let's talk about something else you're reading right now.
Well, sure. Let's stay with DC, what DC's putting out. But this is probably a little bit of a departure of what I'm usually reading. I know that you guys over the past couple of years have really been excited about the Hanna-Barbera properties that DC's been putting out. Flintstones in particular, I know, has made I think a couple of the Comic Book Bears best of lists since last year. So I'm kind of behind on that, but I did decide to pick up the Snagglepuss Chronicles issue number 1, and I was not disappointed at all. I didn't really know what to expect with this one. I mean, here, Snagglepuss, the headlines that came before this was published was, here's a version of Snagglepuss who's kind of more anthropomorphic, more realistic than how he's normally highlighted in the cartoons, where he's just, the goofy Hanna-Barbera character who doesn't wear any pants. Here he's actually a playwright, and they've put the era of this book squarely in the 50s and early 60s, specifically the 50s around the Red Scare and the House Un-American Activities Commission that was put together to root out the more subversive elements of the American media and entertainment industry. And unfortunately, Snagglepuss kind of finds himself caught up in that. Now, when we start in the first issue, it just kind of establishes him as this popular playwright who has this hit Broadway stage play. He's got a bit of a sham relationship going on with his wife, because Snagglepuss is also gay, but as it's the 50s, he can't be openly gay. So there's a wonderful little spot in the book where he sneaks off to the Stonewall to have a drink and meet with his possible boyfriend, sometimes lover, who is from Cuba, and also kind of adds another political element to this story by bringing in the Batista takeover of Cuba that happened prior to the Castro era. So we've got a lot of elements here. We've got a small bit of a racist analogy here, and this is kind of possibly a stretch on my part. This is a world where humans and human-like animals live, coexist side by side, have relationships, get married, have friendships. So that's kind of an established thing, but it's pointed out kind of early on that Snagglepuss is an African lion, and he grew up in the Deep South, and there's a great little panel of him as a little cub, or a little kit, as he calls himself, walking down the street with a copy of the New Yorker, and there's a line of men and dog men just giving him a very interesting angry stare. Now, they're either angry because he's reading the New Yorker, or they're angry because he's an African lion. We're not sure. I'm not too sure. I might be reading it too much, but there's so many political messages in this, and it's a very, very beautiful portrait of the world in the 50s through the lens of a character that is the opposite of what we consider to be a serious character. But I am so intrigued by this series. I'm really wondering where they're going to go with it. And if you are a fan of history, if you're a fan of literature or drama in this time period, then I think you're going to recognize a lot of names, but also a lot of references. So I'm pretty excited about this. I'm pretty intrigued, and I'm sure somebody could probably write a bit of an essay on it. I'm not that person. But I do recommend it, so if anybody wants to pick that up. And again, it is written by the scribe who, I believe it's the same team behind the Flintstones. So that's Mark Russell, with art by Mike Fian and Mark Morales. So, but Mark Russell, a lot of Marks. But Mark Russell really sets up a great first issue here. And if he continues in the same fashion, then I know that he had continued in the Flintstones by bringing in a very modern view of a fake historical time period. But this is a real historical time period, but kind of skewing it through a modern lens. I think people are going to enjoy that.
Is the artist Steve Pugh, or is there another artist assigned to this?
No, it's Mike Fian.
Mike Fian? Okay.
Yeah.
I just don't know offhand if he had done that little teaser story that was in the Suicide Squad Bananas Split special.
I still have to laugh at that exists. That is a thing that exists. Suicide Squad and Banana Splits.
Yeah, some of those Hanna-Barbera crossovers were really good.
Oh yeah,
I loved the Green Lantern Space Ghost one. Oh man, I love that one.
Well, they're just so unexpected. Who's the editor that's responsible for this whole initiative at DC?
I know a lot of that is DiDio, and I know at one point DiDio wanted to bring in the Hanna-Barbera characters as the heroes that would have represented the 60s in the DC universe, which I thought would have been really interesting, because you could have legacy versions of Birdman or Space Ghost, or even like the son of Johnny Quest running around. But there are some legal impediments to that, from what I understand, that DC basically has free reign of these characters, but through Warner Brothers history, they've had a lot of acquisitions, and the big acquisition with Turner in the animation field was Hanna-Barbera in the mid-90s. I think that would have been an interesting take. I do believe Didio is behind a lot of that because I know he has a tremendous love for those characters. And seeing some of the numbers for some of the future quests, like I guess they're hoping they'll do well in trade because they don't sell well at this point. So
Well, I mean, I think they've always been kind of an idea that would appeal to a
yeah,
very niche audience. But the fact that they're consistently
hmm
fun for those people who are coming at it from a sense of nostalgia or a sense of
yeah,
curiosity, there's nothing to really disappoint there. So this is, again, this is not going to appeal to everybody. This is not something that probably a 12-year-old who would normally gravitate towards a superhero comic is going to pick up. Or a 40-year-old who normally gravitates towards superhero comics is going to pick up. I mean, this is something that if you like history, if you like literature, if you like Snagglepuss, but have a very serious love for the character that isn't going to be, scandalized by the fact that it is, now clearly, openly, canonically a gay man who's also a playwright in the 50s. I think it'll be really interesting for you, and I think I would definitely recommend this because it does touch on a lot of important historical points and touchstones in U.S. history, but also for cultural history, especially around what it is being a homosexual in the 50s, or also a more subversive, culturally questioning personage in the 50s when the Red Scare was going on.
yeah. But let's also face it, the characterization of Snagglepuss, it's not a big shock for a lot of people.
I was certainly shocked. I would never think of him
you know,
as
having some Murgatroyd, some Megatroyd even.
or as they put on the cover, which I thought was pretty clever, down at the bottom, and a little inscription, Murgatroyd ad Calum, which is great. But yeah, I think this is fantastic, and honestly, you could take out the anthropomorphic animals and just name switch these, and it could be any work about a gay playwright in the 50s. But the fact that it has animals in there, I think it allows Mark Russell to kind of play with it a little bit more.
It's the Star Trek Twilight Zone conceit, that
Mm-hmm.
there's an easier mechanism to deal with societal issues if there is that fantasy element somewhere within the mix. So yeah, no, I understand that.
The play itself, there's one part where you actually get to see his play, and in the play, the actors are actually wearing costume elements to make them dogs.
hmm
The son is played by a human male. The mother is played by a tiger woman. And and then one of the other characters is a human male playing a dog as well. And it's very interesting, especially because the stage manager is a giant hippo. So it's unique. It's a very unique world that he's created here, and I'm really intrigued by it and very pleased. So.
All right, well, I'm going to talk about a DC proper book now, and I'm going to be talking about Batman Annual number 2. This book has gotten a lot of press and a lot of great reactions. It's written by Tom King, the regular Batman writer, with art by Lee Weeks for most of the book. The end part of the annual was drawn by Michael Lark. If you harken back to just a few months ago, Tom King and Lee Weeks were the creative force behind the Batman Elmer Fudd crossover. And very different story here. It spans times past and times future and times present. It presents in an annual format the romance of Selina Kyle and Bruce Wayne. There's a lot here. It's a love story. Sometimes love stories are the sense of propulsion is provided by the most smallest and intimate moments and not by big events, when naturally with Batman and Catwoman there could be a lot of big events that surround those two characters. So as I mentioned, you see these characters at the beginning when they first encounter each other. You see them as they get to know each other through the careers that they have chosen. As everybody knows, I don't know if everybody knows, but Bruce has proposed to Selina and Selina has accepted. And in a way that is much like the Grayson Futures End issue that Tom King wrote with who's the Tim Seeley. Tim Seeley was the Grayson co-writer. You actually have a flash forward, And it's a not very happy flash forward, and it's also a flash forward that involves a bit of a surprise as well. If you do get this book, make sure you have the tissues on hand toward the end. If you did miss out on it because it did sell out, there is a second printing that just came out for everyone to enjoy if you don't want to go the digital route and want to have it actually in your hands. Again, that's Batman Annual Number 2 by Tom King, Lee Weeks, and Michael Lark. I wish I had more of an expansive description in relation to the events in the issue, but it doesn't need it. It's a love story, and I think if you like these characters or love these characters, you will like or love the story. So there you go.
That's interesting because I know that a lot of people were really against the idea of making it official. I mean, Batman and Catwoman, Selina and Bruce have been, will they, won't they, for decades. I mean, they've been lovers, they've been vicious enemies, they've been sometimes partners, sometimes friends. This whole marriage thing in the main continuity. Because obviously on Earth 2, they've been married.
Yeah, it's nothing new in terms of alternate interpretations.
Yeah, and I think here, because it's not an alternate Earth, because it's not an Elseworlds tale, there's a lot of mixed feelings on whether this is something that that DC should be going towards by having this relationship be solidified in an actual marriage. And I think that flash forward, and again, I haven't read it, so having a flash forward with this love continuing, this relationship continuing up to whatever point that the annual shows. I'm wondering if it's going to possibly sway. Do you think it would sway some people who are completely against this? Or
I've given up on understanding comic fans. I really have. Like the most extreme response I ever encountered was somebody who was genuinely excited about Jon Stewart in Justice League when they had the animated series, thinking that Jon Stewart, the comedian, was going to voice Green Lantern.
What?
And then went on a racist tirade when they found out that it was the African American Jon Stewart character who was going to be represented in the Justice League cartoon. How do you deal with these people? Like seriously, I don't understand the vehement reactions. Now, I've been in situations where, all right, let me tell you. Okay, Mark Guggenheim, okay? I think he's done great on DC TV. I think he's done some really good work. As a comic writer, I don't like his stuff at all. And there was a point where he was going to be writing Action Comics, and he actually took over for a short period toward the very end of JSA before the New 52. That JSA is god-awful. But it's like they all move to this town, and Jay Garrick becomes the mayor, and it's super town. Weird characters come by to live there, like Blue Devil. I mean, it's really weird. But I would never go on any kind of border or anything like this is, travesty. My childhood's been raped, all those, all that nonsense that you hear from people. But I honestly don't know what fuels people to have such and we're certainly seeing it with Last Jedi now as well from, different type of fan. Their sense of ownership of these characters, of having a proprietary interest in them. It seems to me the same people who were bitching about Otto Octavius taking over Peter's body are the same people who were bitching when Otto Octavius died again and Peter was back. Would I give a shit about giving this book to somebody who was bitching about Bruce and Selina getting engaged? No, I don't give a shit. It probably won't sway them, and their rationales for having an issue with it were invalid in my view. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you said, there've been versions of Bruce and Selina together forever, and how can this not be a path that they wouldn't consider given those alternative interpretations? And if you're talking about shaking up things, Superman as dad has worked out pretty damn well. I'm excited to see what happens with this. You know,
Well,
I mean, it's conceivable this is also going to be one hell of a divorce. You know,
or
Some
it's all
great
just a
stories.
dream.
You know, I don't think we're there. I think they've used up the one more day. You can see
Are you
that.
sure that it's not like Cersei somehow like coming in and manipulating everything and making this? Who knows? I mean,
Okay.
honestly, they're going to do something at some point in the future, possibly, to either negate it or change it somewhat or change the perception of it. But
You don't know. You don't know.
you don't know.
It
It could
might
be
be something that people absolutely love when it gets going.
yeah,
You know.
exactly. I mean, hey, people got used to the fact that Batman has an actual son who is
Yeah.
Robin, so who knows? And
That
actually,
wasn't exactly a popular move in the beginning.
no, it wasn't.
No.
But now Damien is pretty solidified as
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 there.
a as
He's
there,
there, you know.
but also a pretty he's a pretty popular character. People like the fact that he's a sadistic little 10-year-old. But actually moving from company decisions or storyline or plot decisions to either change a character in a way that a lot of people get, up in arms about, and then they get used to it, and then they get up in arms again when the status quo changes again. That leads me right to the book that I'm going to be talking about next, is Phoenix Resurrection.
And it's a character that has never had any retcons associated with it.
Oh God, well, the whole character herself could be retcons. I sometimes I feel that Jean Grey could very likely be the Donna Troy of the Marvel universe, in just the fact that they use her as a plot device so many times when they need to, slash and burn, literally. Either her own character or other characters in the Marvel universe, kind of like a Scarlet Witch sometimes when that whole No More Mutants House of N kind of thing. But
I do have to ask, because this isn't a book that I'm reading, who was the creative team behind this? Because I have no idea.
the author, or the writer, I should say, is what's his name? Is Matthew Rosenberg.
Oh, okay. I like some of his stuff. I like Kingpin.
Yeah. Oh no, this book is I think is pretty good. Now I know the reaction is going to be pretty mixed on it. It's a 5-issue miniseries where clearly the point of it is to bring Jean Grey back. Anybody who's seen the solicits for the upcoming X-Men Red knows that original Jean, or whatever we're going to call her now, is back, or will be back. But the element that's a little bit iffy is the whole Phoenix side of it. So is Jean Grey back as Jean Grey? Is Jean Grey back as Phoenix? Is Phoenix, separated from her? Does she come back? Does it come back? Is the Cosmic Force? Who knows? And if you've been reading the Jean Grey series with young Jean Grey, you know that she's been struggling with the Phoenix Force making itself known once again, sort of as a herald to bringing adult Jean Grey back. I'm not really sure. It's confusing at this point. But so in Phoenix Resurrection, of course, the art, I do have to say, the first issue was presumably drawn by Lanil Yu, and there are some great panels. There's some great pages here that he's done, and I'm usually a really good fan of, big fan of his work. I think they may have had some other fill-in artists on this. I'm not sure, because there's some panels that look a little bit rougher than others, and given the place where this sort of series is coming out right now, coming out of the Marvel Legacy movement, obviously it's very important, so they don't want to have any major delays. At this point, I don't think there's any delays that are expected. But who knows? I know they're really trying to push this out and make sure that it's there by the time X-Men Red hits. But the second issue is actually done by another artist. Let's see, who's that one? Oh, it's Carlos Pacheco.
I just looked on the solicits, and it looks like Joe Bennett's on the third issue, so maybe they have different artists for each issue.
Which would actually make sense, because that way they can get it all out in this month. In January, because I think most of it's December, January, and I want to say they're going to be finishing it pretty soon.
Issue 4 is Ramon Rosanas,
Mm-hmm.
and issue 5 is Koi Fam.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
So that's a good strategy to get it out pretty quickly, but of course it means it's going to be kind of inconsistent art-wise. It's not so much. I mean, we know why we're reading this. We want to see Jean Grey back. Well, at least some people do. I have gotten used to young Jean Grey. I like young Jean Grey. Obviously, I have a place in my heart for adult Jean Grey that that's been there since I first started reading X Factor, the original X Factor, and then went back and, you had X-Men Blue and Gold and all the wonderful stuff in the 90s.
This is interesting. So when you got into comics,
Mm-hmm.
the original X-Men were all in X Factor.
Yes.
So you sort of had the same experience I had in the sense of that group being together when you first started reading. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
That was my group of X-Men. Now, at the same time that I was reading X Factor, I was also reading X-Men Classic or Classic X-Men, and seeing those reprints from the giant-size X-Men team. But I was only sporadically reading Uncanny. So for me, the original X-Men or the X Factor team was my first real introduction to Jean Grey and her relationship with Cyclops. And of course, that was right around the time that, they had Nathan, that Nathan was still a baby before Cable came back. So, I got well versed in the whole lore around Jean and Madeline Pryor and what happened with the Phoenix and all of that stuff through that introduction. Years before Wikipedia allowed it to be a lot easier, I had to go digging on my own and read back issues and all that fun stuff. So that was exciting. Now it's a little bit easier to kind of figure out her whole convoluted plot. But back to this comic, it's basically setting up. And if you've been reading some of the other X books, this is not a surprise. Some of the things that are happening in here, but the vehicle that they are going to be reintroducing Jean Grey is kind of interesting. It turns out, because Jean Grey is in the first and second issues, she appears to be in this small town where her parents are still alive. Dead characters from the X-Men's past are all other figures in her life, and she's a waitress. So either this is some sort of, space-time bubble where she's living a normal existence, she's dead and in some kind of weird limbo, or she's possibly in some kind of pocket universe that the Phoenix Force has within it. We're not sure. It'll all be exposed, I'm sure, at the end. But it is kind of interesting to see Jean Grey experiencing sort of small town life with all these other characters, like Banshee shows up as a patron, and Scott, shows up at the door with some flowers, and just interesting little cameos here and there. But the real world, so to speak, starts bleeding into this sort of, fantasy world that Jean Grey is existing in, and that's where we're starting to see the walls shake apart, possibly because of the Phoenix, or possibly because Jean herself is finally waking up or wanting to come back subconsciously or consciously. So it's interesting. I'm liking it so far. I'm intrigued. It is only 5 issues, and of course after that's done, we've got Jean Grey back in the full Marvel Universe. There's no surprises there. The way previews comes out, we know what's going to happen in 3 months from now usually. So I don't know. If you're interested in picking it up, the first issue is a bit pricey, $5, but you do get that fancy, scratchy, lenticular cover that we love so much. That's been really popular the past several months.
When they work?
Yeah, when they work. But otherwise they do make that sound, which I love. And the rest of the issues are standard covers, but there's plenty of variants, so seek them out if you're one of those variant people. We'll see. I mean, it's a story, but at the same time, it's kind of a cash grab. I mean, we know what's going to happen, I'm intrigued. It would be very interesting to see good old Jean Grey back in the Marvel Universe again, and see what happens if she becomes the super most powerful being in the universe again, or if they actually give her something to do.
I was just thinking there's some CGC graded guy that is going crazy listening to you. when you do that squeaky thing with the cover.
Oh no, I may have scratched it a little bit.
Oh my God, yeah. Well, yeah. Let's also talk about the smudges on the back of Doomsday Clock.
Yeah, when you mentioned
God.
that, mine over, and I
Oh
was
my
like,
God.
no, my greasy fingers. I'm gonna have to get gloves or something.
You would think I read this book 30 times. You know? So, well, they're for reading.
Well, the one great thing about the lenticular cover for Phoenix Resurrection #1 is that the back is also lenticular on it, and there's a great advertisement for Marvel 2-in-1 with the Thing and Human Torch that actually works better than the cover. Than the front cover. I don't know. It looks really cool. It's a great 3D effect. And also it's not black, so you can't tell the smudges are there.
I think I'm going to talk about another Marvel book. That sound good?
I'm up for that.
Okay. And the book I'm going to talk about is Peter Parker, The Spectacular Spider-Man #6, which is written by the regular scribe of the book, Chip Zdarsky, and it has art in this particular issue by Michael Walsh. The regular artist is Adam Kubert, so this was a break for Adam. It also wraps up the story that encompasses the first arc. It appears that Peter may have a sister or a half-sister who is a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. That is one of the elements that provides an undercurrent for what happens. Peter knows one person who can help him get some information, and that person happens to be J. Jonah Jameson. And where J. Jonah Jameson is at the beginning of this story is not exactly a great place. If you've been following what's happened in Amazing, J. Jonah Jameson was the mayor of New York. He no longer is. He no longer is a part of the Daily Bugle. And he has a blog, which Peter points out has no comments and no followers. But J. Jonah is connected. And also, J. Jonah is Peter's family because Jameson's father married May. Jameson agrees to help Spider-Man. Spider-Man has come to him, not Peter. And the condition is that he sits down for a 1-hour interview. And if it's a satisfactory interview, then there won't be any blog mentions of Spider-Man for a year. The interview starts off really cute. Jameson makes Spider-Man lasagna, because it's an old journalistic trick that if you get the interviewee fed and drinking, that they'll reveal more. It's in a very concise fashion. The story goes through the relationship of Jonah and Peter. Peter as Spider-Man. Yeah, Jonah tried to kill him. There were all sorts of things through their history where Jameson has been headstrong about exposing Spider-Man that he's not a hero. We get into where this actually comes from. If you've been following ASM, Jameson's wife Marla had died. She makes a reappearance. I use that with quotations in the recent Clone Conspiracy storyline. And as I said at the beginning of the story, he's not in a good place. But you see the humanity of the two characters. Chip he's really good at comedic dialogue, and there's certainly a lot of that there. But this also touches on the heart. Let me tell you, it was like something hit me when Peter said to Jonah, "But your family," and that's before Peter takes a step that changes their relationship forever.
Does he kiss him?
First with Dr. Manhattan cock, and then this, you're always, God Almighty, they don't write comics like that, all right. Well, they do, but they're not going to be in Doomsday Clock #2 or Spectacular Spider-Man #6. It's a done in one. You get a sense of history of the entire relationship between these two characters. You get a sense of where they are at the beginning, and that only takes a few mentions in the preceding pages to set you off. If you haven't read a Spider-Man book in years, you don't need that background to enjoy this particular issue. So I really, really enjoyed this. This came upon the recommendation of two friends, and through this, I am now going to be collecting Peter Parker, probably through digital sales, and that's my second book that I'm talking about, Peter Parker, The Spectacular Spider-Man #6. Okay, so there we go. That's our first episode of 2018, a bit abbreviated, but again, we haven't been out to you in a while due to technical issues and some other stuff. Steve, I gotta say, it's just fun talking comic books with you.
No, it's a ton of fun. I love it.
We'll be coming back to you really, really soon. So we're going to wrap up this episode, and when we wrap up an episode of the Comic Book Bears podcast, we go to a segment that we call the Woofs of the Week segment, where we spotlight something, be it a comic book or a TV program or a film or a charitable initiative, anything under the sun that we think you, fair listener, may enjoy sampling from our detailed description. So, Steve, you take it first. What is your Woof of the Week?
My Woof of the Week is going to be a big flashback story or comic series, and that is The Sandman by Neil Gaiman. And the only reason why I'm bringing it up, I mean, obviously everybody, I feel that everybody should be reading, should have read all of The Sandman, every, comic and every book that Neil Gaiman's ever written. But in Dark Knight's Metal #4, if you've been following that series, there's a bit more of a spot where Daniel, also known as the Sandman or Dream, has a conversation with Superman and Batman in The Dreaming. And if you aren't too familiar with who this character is, why he looks the way he does, why he talks the way he does, this is your perfect opportunity to go back and reread the masterpiece from the late 80s, early 90s, early to mid 90s, I should say. The entire series itself is about 75 full issues. And if you're looking for a refresher, if you already are familiar with the series, or maybe you don't want to go all the way back to the beginning, maybe you just want to, get to where Daniel comes in, I would recommend starting with the Kindly Ones, which, not starting with the Kindly Ones, but if you're just looking for a great standalone story that has huge implications for the character, implications that we're seeing now, definitely read the Kindly Ones. It is collected, of course. The art is by Disraeli, and it's very unique, wonderfully beautiful, great colors. And the story revolves around Leda Hall, who is the Earth 2 daughter of Wonder Woman and oh gosh, who was it? It was Wonder Woman.
Steve Trevor.
Yeah, and Steve Trevor. That's right. And she's also the wife of the of Hector Hall, who happens to be the son of Carter and Kendra Hall. Well, I don't think she was Kendra at the time.
No, she was. It was Shayera.
Shayera.
Yep.
Also of Earth 2, former members of Infinity Incorporated, and scattered to the to the less interested bin of discarded DC superhero characters that Neil Gaiman picked up. And it's a great origin into who Daniel is and why he's the Sandman, because of course he's not the original Sandman. So if you read that, you might get a little bit more background into who this character is, this, weird-looking white dude, who has a library and kind of is very cryptic in his storytelling, literally. But the Kindly Ones, available at finer bookstores or local comic shops or even Amazon if you want to. Pick it up.
But they should read all of Sandman.
Oh, God, yeah, they should start at issue #1, but if they're not going to read the
Well,
Kindly
I guess nowadays you would start with Overture.
I
probably would leave Overture for the last to make the circle.
Yeah, read it after the week.
Yeah, just so people who may be unfamiliar with this, the Overture is a prequel to the series with amazing art by J.H. Williams III and was written by Neil Gaiman.
I think we've talked about it a couple times.
Yeah. You can find it in the archives. It basically, the next moment of the end of Overture is Sandman #1. The only thing I'm going to say about Sandman, Preludes and Nocturnes, if you read the first trade and don't exactly fall in love, that's okay, because it takes a little while to get going, and that little while is very soon with The Doll's House. Preludes and Nocturnes, it's very well done. I don't want to discourage anybody from reading it, but it's not the most effective volume in Sandman.
Well, it's very much of its era. It's very pre-Vertigo. In fact, this was the series that kind of, led right into the Vertigo era at DC. This one and Hellblazer and a couple other ones, but This one, Neil Gaiman is finding his comic book voice with this character, because this was wholly his. And that's, that I think was kind of a big first for him. But, obviously over the course of the series, he finds an amazing voice with it. And this character just goes down in history as one of the most well-written comic figures, I think, of the 20th century. Yeah, Preludes and Nocturnes, kind of.
There's a lot more DC Universe involvement in that volume.
Yeah.
But when you get going in the series, when you do have these characters pop up like Prez or Element Woman, it's he found the vibe very quickly. It's just not in that first volume. And plus, the first volume, you get the first appearance of Lucifer.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot.
But Doll's House is really that standalone. If you were just to read a Sandman book, Doll's House is amazing. If you're looking for Daniel, though, in the Origins of Daniel, that's pretty much happens around Kindly Ones and continues in through the Wake.
And also, just keep in mind, these also tie into some other books, as we mentioned, Lucifer, and most specifically Death.
Yeah, Death, Lucifer, The Dreaming.
I do think Death, mainly because of Gaiman's involvement, that's the one that most closely aligns with.
And if you're not familiar with Death, just go to a Hot Topic. I'm sure there's still some T-shirts.
I don't know about that these days.
They're buried in there with the anime, with the Attack on Titan and the Rick and Morty ones.
All right. I don't know about that these days. I did see in the solicitations that there's like a $75 Ankh that you can buy from DC Direct. Look beautiful.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
I'm sure it is. They had the Victorian death statue that came out recently, or at least was solicited recently. It looks very cool.
And also keep in mind that though it comes on and off, there does seem to be interest within Warner Brothers for a Sandman movie. So someday you'll get that.
A TV series would do well. And also, if you haven't, and I know I talked about it before, if you have a chance, go look up the fan film. It's going to drive me nuts, the name of it, but go look up the fan film for the Sandman that took one of the stories out of Preludes and Nocturnes and filmed it. It's a nice 30-minute, really, really good interpretation, I think.
Yeah. Oh, and one other thing I got to say, and I don't know where that fits in. One of my favorite Sandman stories is Sandman Midnight Theater, where you have the meeting of Dream and Wesley Dodds, the original JSA Sandman. Did you ever read that?
No.
Oh, you got to read that. It's co-written by Wagner, because Matt Wagner was the writer of Sandman Mystery Theater. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. It's so good. You got to read it. Oh, you got to read that. It's got to be in one of those supplemental collections or something. I think it was in Gaiman's Midnight Tales or something.
You know what? I think I have. Yeah, I think I have read it then. If it was in his, it was sort of like the off collection that happened right before Kindly Ones.
Yeah.
Sort of like a collected volume that had different issues. The special, a couple of things.
Okay, well, there was the Sandman section of our podcast.
There you go.
It was a very lengthy tangent, but worthwhile because it's something you all should read. Okay, that leaves me with my Woof of the Week, and my Woof of the Week is a series that premiered on Netflix on December 22nd, and that is a documentary series in 4 parts right now. There will be 4 parts coming up called The Toys That Made Us, and this focuses on the history of very important toy lines. The first 4 episodes, which have hit, focus on Star Wars, He-Man, Barbie, and G.I. Joe. All have fascinating information, all very well constructed. And with subsequent episodes featuring Lego, Transformers, Hello Kitty, and Star Trek, definitely worth your while. And if you have Netflix, it's very easy to pull it up. The Toys That Made Us on Netflix. Well, that's our latest episode of the Comic Book Bears. If you want to follow us, you can do so by liking us on our Facebook page, which is Comic Book Bears Podcast. You can find us on the Twitter and the Tumblr and the Instagram as Comic Book Bears. If you want to write to us, you can do so by sending an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. And lastly, if you want to listen to us, you can listen to us through iTunes and also through Stitcher Radio. Until next time, I'm Billy Z.
And I'm Steve Mowry.
You're going to hear a woof and an explosion. We'll be back real soon. Take care, everyone. Woof!